Hello!
Hello. What's happening?
Well, what's happening, Herds, is that for the first time ever on this show,
Oh my god.
we are in different rooms.
What? Could have fooled me. I feel like we're both sitting in the same room, staring at each other, looking at our dreamy eyes, all that other shit. It's good stuff.
Yeah.
I'm
So,
ready.
we are currently self-isolating responsibly.
Yeah.
I don't know at what stage this video is coming out. I used to have a tracker up for what every episode was going to be, but then schedules changed and life changed and things got in the way. I guess we can talk about that a bit later on in this video if we want to. I'm not sure if we'll keep it in, but we might have a hash of it.
Look, either this will come out and we'll still be under quarantine, and it'll be like a year from now, or everything will be fine, or it won't come out because it'll be the apocalypse.
Yeah.
And these will be like records that like aliens will come and find and be like, yo, that's what people used to be like.
Well, I mean, hey,
they
listen.
used to self-isolate and talk across the internet.
Let's just remember for a second that this is like the third or so apocalypse we've had this year.
It's true.
So we have
It's true.
we have plenty more
Fourth,
in the coming month.
Look, hold on. Let's be clear here. January was bushfires. February was floods. March was the great toilet paper apocalypse.
Yes.
Technically, we're still in March as the coronavirus is going around, but I guarantee you will not see the worst of it until next month. So it's going to be the first 4 months of the year, first 4 apocalypses. So many apocalypses.
So who knows?
Like,
we might get a month off. We might get a month off somewhere down the line because we're currently at a surplus.
Yeah, I feel like that'll just be the opportunity for some like mad scientist in Antarctica, like, finally, the media is not watching anything right now. This is my time to capture the public's attention. And then he'll like launch his doomsday device, might control the whole world.
So our situation aside, it is time, Herds, to sit down and talk about Minagoroshi.
I guess we should. Let's
It is
do
the first recap. This is the one where we go through and give our immediate reactions. We have just this previous weekend gone through and for 12 and a bit hours gotten through the entire tail half of Minagoroshi, which we thought was going to be like 4 hours.
Yeah.
We thought we were going to be there for a nice, relaxing, quick bout, go grab some lunch, but no, we were there until 1 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, no, I was exhausted. Look, that's mostly my fault. Let's be clear. I've done that before where we did with the Sumi ending where I was like, yes, we have, these one chapter left. It's going to be great. But it was like, it was more than that.
Yeah.
But this has been the most underestimated arc yet. And honestly, I'm going to be real with you. When we started Minagoroshi, I was like worried that it was going to be too long. I was, because I've already been through the like Sadako Save It from the Child Consultation Center arc and the like,
Yes.
Let's see if we could figure out who the culprit is, even though we all know who the culprit is. Like most of that stuff, Rika's like internal monologue there. She's like, but what if it's actually Irie? I don't remember that being in the anime. I'm pretty sure that's like, I don't know, I'm just guessing here, but I'm pretty sure it's like a throwaway line. It's like, wait, that doesn't make any fucking sense. So we won't spend the next 2 hours debating whether or not it's Irie or Takano.
Yeah.
Despite the audience knowing that it's Takano. Oh, boy.
Yeah, it definitely is curious because I think that of all of the arcs we've covered so far, we've spoken at length about how various arcs would be perceived by people who know what's going on and who don't know what is going on.
Yeah.
I think that Minagoroshi would be the biggest gap between any of them thus far.
Interesting.
Because there are so many things that are like fan servicey moments that are playing into like, hey, look at all these characters getting along, but then also have a sinister undertone because of who's involved with them, particularly like the nursing scene earlier on where Sadako was getting her shots or whatever.
Sure.
I think that it ultimately comes down to the arc doesn't take itself seriously enough for if you know what's going on.
I think so. I think I'd agree. Certainly in terms of Takano, I think. I think that her like shock and awe that she goes through would be a lot more impactful for people who don't know what's going on. Like when I first watched it, I was like, it's like I thought it was Takano, but I didn't think it was this big.
Yeah.
Whereas you were like, oh, this is too big. Like, like I like Takano's reveal as like the bad guy. I like how like malicious she is. I like her new outfit, and I like the fact. Look, I love the scene. In a macabre way, where she just goes ham on the club. She's like, yo, y'all think you can, like, change fate just with your crush it like a sheet of paper or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
I have a gun. Like, she
know what?
literally is
Honestly,
like, I have a gun.
I love that scene, regardless of its context. I think that her
Yeah.
coming in and just absolutely ripping everything to shreds at the moment.
She just decks everybody.
Yeah.
That's literally what happens.
I think that was the one point in the story where Ryukashi's roller coaster was actually switched on. Because we commented towards the end that things just kept building and having like little dips, but it never really, the little dips never really built the tension. I think that one of the main things that Ryukashi does well with his emotional roller coaster is that he has these big highs and these big lows that kind of contrast each other, and it's the switch between them that helps things work. But the thing that his later stories have done well in my eyes is that when they have those huge lows, the lows are building up the importance of the highs. Whereas I think that the lows in this arc were, first of all, more minor depressions than they were like actual lows.
Yeah.
And second of all, undermined the importance of the main arc rather than reinforcing it.
Maybe. I do like the concept of Rika as a protagonist. Her internal monologue and the thoughts that she has are very different to Keiichi, who is very hyperactive, and Rena, who's very like factually focused, like she's always focused on like the logic of the situation. Rika is depressed. Like that is what her mindset is trying to portray. And it is only natural in this portrayal of depression that we'll have a character who goes around and around in circles and doesn't really want to do anything. However, I think the part of Minagoroshi that makes those parts suck the most, it's a certain character. It's not Sadako. It's not Rika herself. I think that the inclusion of Hanyu in those scenes actually is a detriment. And like, I like the idea of a character being the kind of physical or ethereal representation of, you know, a bad mental state. I really like that as a theme. But we not only dip to these lows with Rika, but we also go back and forth between her, like being depressed and having her own internal monologue, and scenes with Hanyu where Hanyu represents that internal monologue.
Yeah.
I don't know why we have both. I think it is just far too much time. It makes me dread every time Hanyu comes on screen, because clearly just an opportunity for us to like double explain everything.
Yeah, I think that one of the other problems with Hanyu is that she is one of those elements of the story where she is a great addition to the lore of the story, but she is not a great addition to the actual written story.
Sure.
Like, if you were to tell me that Rika sees her internal thoughts as this pseudo-demon god figure that is constantly questioning her actions, then that's a cool thing to establish, and we can kind of have throwaway lines referencing that that's what's inside her head. But as you say, because we have these full cyclical arguments, and because there are so many of them, it doesn't really make any sense. And the problem is that they start adding up as well. Like, even right towards the end of the story, we have like phone calls with the police that are going in circles because the police do or do not want to do things.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can kind of put up in Ryukashi's stories with the occasional looping conversation, because you get the point that they are taking themselves in circles. He is demonstrating what is happening in their heads.
Yep.
He is showing rather than telling. I just think that of all the things to show rather than tell, it is a poor choice, especially in such great volumes.
I mean, I think that the issue that the latter part of the arc suffers from is that there are too many things that Ryukashi is trying to show. Because obviously, and this is indicative in the way that the story ends for Minagoroshi, and also the staff room, he says that it would be sad to have a riddle book without answers. And he's very much decided to just, you know, after the revelation of Sumi Hiraboshi, which has said, you know, it is a time loop, and this is how we fix things, this is how we can move forward. Like, we reach the emotional high points. And then he said, okay, so the next arc, I'm just going to explain everything. And he spends too much time explaining, not enough time doing interesting things with the characters who are part of those explanations.
Yeah, it was particularly interesting actually just looking at your body language as we were going through like all of those documents and explaining how the bacteria worked, because I don't think you were quite aware how much we were in for there.
No.
Like, as I said when we were recording, like, you obviously clearly expected something
I didn't expect
different
that.
because when we were reading Sumi, you were kind of like saying, like, wait on it, we'll kind of see how it builds. But it didn't build, it fucking crashed.
Well, in Minagoroshi, I was not expecting us to literally have these long expository scenes like that. I was expecting them in Watanagashi, for example, when Takano gives her, like, this is the history of the town, and this is how the demons work. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like, I expected it to be a big old monologue there. And any of, like, Keiichi's, oh my god, I'm blanking. Is it 300 seconds? Point is, he's like, I'm going to go 1,500 seconds. 300 would be more impressive, but his 1,500 second speech I was not prepared for, but was totally ready for when it happened. That was fantastic. But Rika's explanation of, like, this is why I am important to the story, but it took like 20 minutes for her to explain, like, this is why I am the secret protagonist of this entire story, rather than Keiichi, and, like, this is why this secret society exists, and this is why Takano wants to kill me, and Like, it wasn't even in character, it was just an explanation. And then there was all the manuals.
Yeah, there were more or less points you couldn't tell where the authorial line was.
It was awful. I hated that so much. I don't remember in the anime what happens during that scene. Like, in my mind, what happens is that she says, I'm going to stay home. And then it cuts forward a little bit, and her friends are there, and, like, we can help you out. And she's like, oh, but you shouldn't. And, like, but we will. And then it cuts forward to nighttime when she gets ambushed, and then they totally come back and help her, and that's it. Like, I don't remember there being any explaining that's done. They just are like, we don't care what the problem is. We're going to fucking help you. If you think you're going to be attacked by, like, mafia mobsters during the night, we'll be there. And that's all that really needed to be said in that scene.
Yeah. And I think that one of the particularly frustrating things about this arc is that so many of these problems are towards the tail end. So that the last thing you're left with is a bad taste. Because even though a lot of the earlier scenes are similarly as circular as those final ones, they are still building really well towards the conclusion of Sadako's whole arc with Teppei there.
Sure.
I thought that there were some really great scenes of them, questioning each other and building up the emotion and the red flame, blue flame thing that were all, they were fun, they were engaging, they were definitely more repetitive than they needed to be, but it was it felt more bite-sized because we were jumping from scene to scene more quickly rather than place. Yeah. Rather than being stuck in, Rika's house for 3 chapters straight.
Oh, God. Shout out to Ruby Volume 5. I'm not the biggest fan of the Sadako Center arc, whatever we're calling it, Child Consultation Center. I hate saying it. It's the Sadako Center arc. I'm not the biggest fan of it. I do think it drags on far longer than it should. And it was a part of the story that I was not looking forward to. But I was looking forward to what happened immediately afterwards, because in my head, I was like, all right, once we get through all these scenes with Sadako, we can resolve that with the, like, you should turn around and, like, tell Teppei he's a dick moment, which is great. I love that moment. I love that when Sadako finally gets her shit together and Rika's, like, actually telling herself what she needs to do. Because that's obviously a running theme where they're like, you can't just, give up before you've even begun to really fight. And you also can't, misconceive what the fight is, which is what Sadako does. Because she thinks, well, all I have to do is steal myself and endure the punishment, and then Sadashi will come back. And Rika's like, you can't, like, you're just relying on Sadashi still. Even though you're framing it in your head as, like, you're being a strong person, you're actually not. You need to fucking fight, dude. And she does. And Rika does the same thing to Takano when she's going to get tortured. And Hanyu has the same, like, I love that through line between the 3, like, youngest characters of the story there. That's fantastic. But the build-up, I think, is just far too long. And so in my head, I was thinking, now that we've done the Sadako arc, we've had that, like, moment of triumph. Now it's time to get stuck into the tragedy where everything goes wrong. And we ended up getting several expository scenes that were not very interesting. So.
Yeah, the curious thing is, and I'll obviously kind of uncover this in editing as I go back, but it felt to me like, unlike a lot of Ryukishi arcs, this actually got slower and slower towards the end. Normally he builds pace and builds energy towards the end.
Yeah.
But it felt like we had less energy towards the beginning, but a lot more energy and a lot, more spread out timing of that energy towards the end, which is
Yeah.
very unusual of him. And I was a little kind of taken aback by it, because I think that particularly at the start, when we're looking at Rika's whole reaction to how Keiichi just comes in and changes the board game day thing.
It's a really good moment.
You know, I thought that was, you know, there was some good energy, there was some good movement, and there was a very quick fire response between Keiichi going like, oh yeah, I can just change this, and it changing, and then Rika going, oh my god, it changed. You know, obviously your standard Ryukishi redundancies, I've never heard him repeat himself, but it kept moving. Then we got onto the Chard consultation arc, and things were moving. We were still hopping from scene to scene, but we were stuck on the same problem for a long time.
Yeah.
Then we got to the tail of the story, and we were stuck in the same place with the same problem for so long. And it was a shame, because by the time we actually got out of there and Takano came up with a sniper rifle and shot them all in the fucking face, we'd spent so long sitting still that my legs were sore.
I believe that Takano shoots them with a handgun at the end there, not a sniper rifle. But you're right, there is a sniper rifle that kills Oishi, which is, depressing. But
I thought that her first shot to Keiichi was a sniper rifle, and then she pulls out a handgun.
You might be right on that, but I believe she executes most of the club.
Yes, you're definitely right about the executions.
Yeah, because it's nice and personal. But no, like, I mean, I totally agree with you. I don't... normally, I would like to be like, oh, but Ryukishi, blah, 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 but, like, I was disappointed. And it's definitely partly because, like, the recording session was going for so long. We've been pretty open about that.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, usually I can push through that and be like, well, actually, I'm enjoying this. But I did not enjoy suspecting Irie. I did not enjoy all those documents that we went through for some stupid reason.
Yeah. I mean, truth be told, I think for once I actually had more fun with the tedium of it than you did.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was just enjoying seeing your despair grow as we got further and further in.
I know. You went full Takano in that moment, which I appreciate.
It was really great just seeing, like, because I think it's important for people who haven't been following the whole way through as well, that this is more or less your first time through with this chapter of the VN as well, because you know the story from the anime, but this was your first time actually reading the VN version.
Yeah. I watched the anime. It was my first exposure to Ryukishi's works, and I'm finally getting to read it through. And I think that, I disagree with you on Super Higurashi. I don't want to get into that too much, but up until this point, I have thought that the VNs on the whole have been stronger than their anime counterparts. Minagoroshi, I have not gotten the same experience with. Like, the Kai arcs, that being not the same way they're broken up in the VNs, but in the anime, it's arc 7 and 8, and there's also an arc that's put between arcs 6 and 7 to cover a bunch of the plot-relevant stuff that you need to know for going into arc 7. It also includes the Hinamizawa disaster, which is what we got at the end of arc 7. That is in arc, I guess, 6.5 in the anime instead. Mm-hmm. And we actually get to see Sadako go through that, which is really horrifying. But there's a lot of cool stuff in there, which I really enjoyed. I really enjoyed the anime-only arc. It's really good. But for the Minagoroshi, like, especially in that, the chase scene, I actually think was even dumber. Like, cut out all that explaining. The Sadako Center arc is more or less the same, but I think that the ending is much choppier, and I think I prefer it. I think I prefer Minagoroshi's ending as it is in the anime. Not necessarily the rest of the arc. I think the rest of the arc is about the same. But for the ending there, I actually prefer it. Like, as I said while we were watching it, I like how in the anime, when the club members are getting shot at by Takano, they're literally trying to, like, run, and one by one they stand up, like, because Rika's trying to run away, and one by one the club members are like, don't worry, I'll stay back, I got this shit, and they get shot by Takano because their will is not strong enough. That's just how it be. But watching them all independently, like, stand up and say, Takano, I'm not going to let you get past me, I'm going to buy time for Rika to escape, and it's all in vain, of course. I like that a lot more than, like, oh no, they've shot Keiichi, now we've all been grabbed and we're handcuffed.
Interesting. Because I thought that one of the interesting things about the presentation of the scene in the VN there was the way that the language kind of paralleled what we'd been saying about Fate for the entire arc.
Sure.
It almost felt like the entire, setup of that scene with Takano coming in at the end was a counterpoint to the Fate is as thin as a piece of paper there.
Oh, absolutely.
Where,
I mean,
the idea being that it is Takano's fate to eventually be undermined by these kids.
Maybe.
But she steps in and shatters that fate, and that's what we're talking about with, the group suddenly falling apart when Keiichi gets shot. That's what, that time freeze moment is, where it's like, this is where the paper has been torn through. And I kind of like it.
Takano's moment.
Yeah, I kind of like that they use the analogy of glass there more with Takano's scene and her breaking it. Because the idea being that Takano is like a more powerful entity, so her fate is more like a glass. It's more solid, but, it can be punched through. And that also then when we get to the bullet thing, the idea that like glass splits so instantaneously when you like shatter it.
Yeah.
So that her taking that shot there froze that time, and that moment where the bullet is fired at Keiichi is like the singular moment where the entire sheet of glass cracks because of this one action.
Yeah. So the term that we're actually looking for here is will. Will is the name of Takano's like character song. And the implication that's kind of built on in Arc 7 is that fate is as thin as a sheet of paper. That's just true. And it requires a will in order to bust through it. It's not about having the capacity to change things or not. It's about actually trying. Because Keiichi, once he says, "No, I could change fate," he does it very easily. And Rika also does it very easily, and Sadako does it very easily. It's not about whether or not a thing is possible. It's about whether you are willing to try and make that thing possible. And so the outcome that we see at the end of Arc 7 of Minagoroshi, the Massacre chapter, it's a lovely name, is that Takano's will is stronger than Rika's and of all of the club members.
Yeah, totally.
Which is why, even though like in the moment it's framed as like, there were 7 of them and only 6 of us, so we need you, Hanyu. It's not just about like a numbers game. It's the fact that Takano's will is being carried out, her will to like become a god and show up Oishiro-sama and kill Rika is carried across every single timeline that we have seen so far. It's not just about fate and like what's preordained. It's that Takano, whoever she is, whatever she's doing, she has a will that transcends across every timeline.
Yeah, totally.
And that is what Rika is fighting against. And to me, like, that is why I find her so compelling as a villain. Even though she gets a bit hammy.
Yeah, she definitely does get hammy. And like, I don't know if I necessarily even want to talk about how hammy she is, because I feel like the problems with it are just so self-evident. There isn't any, I think, extensive criticism about Takano that I could make because she is just so cartoonishly evil. It undermines a story that has such a centered emotional core.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very simplistic story on the whole, except for Takano. Right? Like even the elements of magic and mysticism, I think mysticism is a better word for it.
Yeah, totally.
Surrounding Hanyu, because she's never actually like seen by anyone. She's just like an extra voice. And the powers that she gives to Rika are pretty like, they're pretty lame, honestly. It's just the ability to like do the same thing over and over again, which is insanity, of course. But like on a whole, the story is very centered. It is very like simple and straightforward. The actions that the characters take, and more importantly, the horror that we experience. Like if we go all the way back to Arc 1, the very simple mistake that was made is that Keiichi didn't trust his stupid friends, and so he hit both of them once in the head with a baseball bat and bonked them to death.
Yep.
That's it. Like it's incredibly tragic. All of the fucking horrible things that we've seen done over all of the arcs, except for Shion's, anyway, have been very simple and straightforward and like, spur of the moment decisions.
Yeah.
Takano's sins that she commits are the only ones that are like truly monstrous, like it's the massacre of an entire town of 2,000 people, the death of all of our protagonists. Every single one of them dies in her hands, except for, I suppose, Akasaka. But apart from him, all the other ones die. Like, the actions that she's been implied to have been perpetrating across the last 6 and now 7 arcs are so huge. I don't know what she could have done with it. Like, I don't know, especially as an amateur writer who's writing very genuinely and passionately.
Yeah.
I don't know what else he could have done, is the problem.
I just think that it somewhat has undermined her that they have presented her comic book villain motives outright and left the perhaps more plausible motives in the shadows, perhaps that leaves a more interesting mystery to be resolved in Matsuri Bayashi, but particularly her relationship with what I believe is now her grandfather, Hifumi.
Maybe.
That seems to be her motivation, but instead she's become cartoonishly evil rather than having any ground level, representation of the fact that, like, her family was basically shot to ground by bureaucrats ignoring Hifumi's, understanding of the medical situation in Hinamizawa.
Maybe.
And, Takano's trying to, like, effectively get vengeance for that. And whilst that is still very comic booky, I think that presenting that in some more upfront way would have been a better way to give the answers than just, well, now she's being really weird and seducing Tomitaki while trying to convince him to be evil, and now she's just evil as fuck, and that's that.
Well, to be fair, we are not at the end of the story yet. We still have one more arc to go. Ryukishi is very focused in this arc in Minagoroshi on giving us the answers to the murder mystery that he has set up, which I still think is like not a great move, but that was his focus. The who and the how have been thoroughly thrown to us in excruciating detail that nobody asked for. But the why has only really, like, you say it's been displayed to us or given to us, whatever, but I would say that the things you're kind of grabbing out there, saying like, it's a grandfather, it's about the research, where like, even that hasn't been as explicitly kind of
I completely agree, but what I'm saying is that the fact that these things have been foreshadowed but weren't utilized before the comic book villainry is underwhelming to me. I would have liked to have kind of grounded her and then made the final showdown blown out of proportion as like a fun wrap up to the story in Matsuri Bayashi, rather than just going straight ham and then probably having to dial it back in the final one.
Yeah, Minagoroshi is pretty infamous as being like an incredibly downer ending. I don't know, like, I feel like you've expressed it more or less the way that I would. Like, that is what Minagoroshi is supposed to be. Ryukishi spouts lore and then everybody dies. So that we can, like, wrap things up properly next arc. Whereas structurally, it's an interesting choice structurally to just have this horrible bad end right before the finish line.
Yeah, like, I think that we still could have effectively crushed everyone with a, I guess, nerfed Takano, and then brought in the big guns next time to, like, escalate the final showdown or something.
Yeah.
But I'm not too concerned about it, because it is the way that it is, and I still enjoyed it a lot, even if it took a long time for me to get any enjoyment out of it.
Let's be entirely clear. My criticisms are less at the betrayal of Takano, which I still can enjoy in its own merit, more so at Rika's explanation of the Queen Carrier and all other bullshit, and also of the going through the documents, which was just painful.
Yeah. I mean, I have much the same feelings about it, but I feel like I expressed those fairly plentifully in Sumahiroboshi because that was where those problems kind of first occurred to me, whereas it seems like you've kind of come around to my way of thinking because this arc made you.
I mean, I didn't have that much problem with him in Arc 6. There's still like a good amount of mystery there, especially if you're not trying to actively solve the murder. I think that Arc 6 is quite helpful in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think that Minagoroshi goes a bit too far for my liking.
Totally. I think that's probably a good note to drag us over to Umineko spoilers, actually.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. Let's do it.
I will say we're going to go with our normal policy of only context spoilers. We're not going to spoil specific moments in the story.
I mean, we have to touch on Umineko's ending.
But yeah, we do have to go. We do have to go a bit deeper than normal.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say this is effectively a full spoiler warning.
Yes,
but if you are feeling exceedingly brave, we'll do our best.
Yeah. I look. Let's be real. If we're going to talk about the nature of the ending of Umineko, like we're going to be talking about that.
We're not going to say what the ending is, but we're going to get pretty deep.
We're gonna talk about its nature and like why it even occurred in the first place. Like, it's going to be a great discussion, but maybe go read Umineko and come back.
All right, you have as of now to be out here. Okay, so I think the reason I transition here, Herds, is
Ryukishi changed his mind. Is that what you want to talk about?
Is because Ryukishi changed his mind. Obviously,
pretty drastically.
You know, the entire authorial thing at the end in the writers' room is that, you know, we want to give people answers, And doesn't it feel bad to not have answers? But then by the time we get to Umineko, it feels as though Ryukashi, I don't know if it's the opposite, though. What it feels like to me is that we have said for a long time that Umineko is a story about storytelling, and one of the things that it does very well is it shows you in great length, without ever explicitly explaining it to you, why it is important to leave your stories somewhat open-ended.
Sure.
Why it is satisfying as a creator to leave questions, because there is this underlying feeling that any conclusion you will write will be inferior to the idea of a conclusion.
Sure.
It does not mean that you leave things entirely unanswered. It means that you leave things open-ended enough that there is a question mark at the end of your final page rather than a full stop. And I do not actually think that Ryukashi thought exactly what he wrote in that staff room tip.
Oh, interesting.
I feel like what has happened is that because he started this story not thinking of it as a mystery novel, and then has clearly started to read up on mystery novels by the time we've gotten this far in the story, he has been led to believe that a mystery story requires a concrete ending.
Sure.
And that his presentation of this in the end is what he thinks a concrete solution to this story is, when I do not think that if you had asked Ryukashi 6 months before writing Minagoroshi, he would have had an entire idea as expansive as what he wrote here.
I would have gone the other direction and tackled Umineko, which is, it's interesting that you put it that way. Because I think of it, the other kind of side of the coin here is that the ending of Umineko is infamously open-ended. Vague is a strong word, but definitely open-ended for sure. And that it seems, if you read Umineko at face value, a lot of the characters tell you, like, maybe we shouldn't uncover what the real truth is, and like maybe it doesn't matter what the answer to the riddles are. But from what I've read and understood, a lot of Ryukashi's kind of riding on that, this idea that, you know, you shouldn't be told what the answer really is not just his own thinking and his own kind of exploration of murder mystery, which it definitely is, but also in response to fan feedback. Because the themes in Umineko's solution are to some degree challenging to readers. Not all readers, but readers. And that he was encouraged by that feedback to obfuscate the truth because he didn't think that his audience would be able to handle it. He thought that the backlash would only increase if he were to spell out the ending. I wonder if he hadn't gotten as much backlash as he did, especially in Japan, if he would have just told us exactly what was going on in Umineko, in the way that he does in Higurashi.
It's curious. I guess I'm not as familiar with the cultural situation around, for lack of a better descriptor, answers in Japan. I don't really know what to bounce off there because, like, to my mind, as a creator, and as we spoke about at great length in Umineko, one of the things that I have always felt is that leaving, you know, the question mark at the end rather than the full stop is something that is difficult to avoid as a creator, because you know, there is always that question that, like, was that the right ending? And you can't really go back and undo it per se.
Okay.
And I'm curious as to whether that is actually just an entirely cultural different thing in Japan.
I should clarify. It's not, I'm trying to avoid spoilers here, but like, it's not about the idea of just giving an answer to a story. It's that the answers to Umineko involve certain political topics that his audience may not have been ready for.
Right. Yeah. No, I completely understand that part of your story there. It just got me thinking about, like, is there a cultural difference between, you know, how we see it creatively in Japan and here? Because you're right that there are definitely, and I mean, even in this story, when we look at, you know, some of the relationships between the characters and some of the ways that we portray problematic elements of society, they are very confronting issues, and not necessarily all members of the audience may be up to dealing with those at a face value. I know particularly when you look back at the comments, I mean, even just before I hit record, the last thing I was reading before we started this today was a comment from someone talking about how their personal experience related to issues that are presented in the tail end of Umineko. So obviously there are parts of the audience that are very clued into it and others that aren't so much, I'd argue maybe like myself. And it's just interesting to think about how, that cultural difference is affecting what Ryukishi learned between these stories. Because to my mind, it was very much about his perspective as an author, whereas you're saying perhaps it was more about his perspective of his audience.
Well, I find it interesting on the topic of backpedaling, so to speak. I find it interesting to see the depiction of Teppei, because though he is an indescribable monster in all portrayals we've seen of him, it is implied in a tip in Arc 3 that Teppei is sexually abusing Sadako, which is horrifying and the worst. But in Minagoroshi, he explicitly says, she's not old enough to molest yet, but I will later. And it's been interesting kind of reading through. I haven't seen the Japanese side of this. I've only seen the Western side, but I've seen some people say that was very much the right thing to do, pulling back on that element of the story because it's not a cool thing to think about Sadako being abused by her uncle just in general. But I've seen some people be very critical of that and compared it to the way that Umineko's ending was handled as well, saying that by pulling back on that aspect and actually making Teppei less monstrous, you're devaluing that part of the story, and also neglecting to kind of represent, a horrifying act that could be committed by someone who is in your family, I don't have a lot of personal experience with the topic, but that's something that I've noticed. I've noticed fans kind of reacting with, either it's a great idea to keep things tasteful and more PC, or it's a good it was a terrible idea and he shouldn't have. He's sailing at half mast. He should have gone full ham on the sexual abuse and showing what a terrible, horrible monster Teppei was.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things you can compare that to say nothing of my own opinion on the matter, is when you look at how particularly writers deal with sexuality and lust. Because when you're reading someone else's writing of a lustful or romantic perspective, descriptions of people's bodies and stuff can often seem really weird and uncomfortable.
It's a little awkward, yeah.
And the thing is that, sometimes those aren't entirely inaccurate. Sometimes that is, maybe what you think when you look at a person, but on the other hand,
is it okay to write down?
Well, not necessarily is it okay to write down, but the idea that sometimes turning the mirror back is uncomfortable, and that the aversion that causes is too significant to keep in relative to the value that it gives. So if we turn that back to Teppei, the idea being that regardless of the sexual abuse thing, he is still being an objective monster. And the people who might have been turned away by the sexual abuse side of it because they didn't feel comfortable reading it, are basically given a gateway into the story by the removal of that aspect.
Yeah. I mean, he makes up for it by delving more into his defilement of Satoshi's memory, right? By saying, the bank book is clearly in Satoshi's room, even though, to any sane person, that doesn't make any sense. That's a very easy way to show, rather than through, he's molesting Sadako. No, he's disrespecting her dead brother's name, or whatever is going on there. And that's bad. I could talk more about the commercial side of things, but just from an emotional involvement standpoint, it is a much softer way to telegraph monstrosity.
I think so. And, I can definitely see and agree to a certain extent with the argument that it undermines how much of a monster he is. But at the same time, the idea that you need that much of a monster to be a villain in the story almost leads us full circle back to Takano. The idea that, you need to blow something out of proportion for it to be bad.
I was going to say, the problem as well, this is probably better as a Higurashi comment more than an Umineko comment, but it's interesting that Teppei is such a horrible, despicable person, and then we still haven't unveiled our true culprit. Takano had to be significantly worse for Teppei. Certainly Ryukishi thought so, in order to be a compelling villain. which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think the other thing that we mentioned in a short bonus episode in one of the last few videos was SS Van Dyne and how clearly the tail end of the story is very reflective of perhaps why Ryukishi ended up including Van Dyne in the writing of Umineko and, using his rules. I think it was somewhat particularly fitting that Van Dyne's real name was Will, and that, much of the use of his character and his rules in Umineko is indicative of the whole shattering of fate and having a strong will thing.
Okay. I feel like you're reaching, but I'm ready to go on this journey with you.
Well,
yes, continue.
It's obviously not a very one-to-one thing, but I think that it was, I was just kind of chuckling to myself when I was thinking oh yeah, he named the character Will when this entire arc that is clearly bringing the most damage to Good Sir Van Dyne's name is all about having will and breaking fate.
Yeah. I definitely think it's more of a coincidence, a funny coincidence than anything else.
And it was very interesting to see, particularly when we get to, Van Dyne's rules about mafiosos and other criminal organizations, just how entirely out of line Ryukishi got with the rules there. Because, as I said, there were very clearly signs in the way that the story was written and structured that he had started to look into murder mystery fiction to some extent by this point. But clearly hadn't gotten quite to Nox and Van Dyne yet.
I mean, it's interesting even thinking about the kind of core murders of the story, that being Takano and Tomitaki, because Takano doesn't actually die, and Tomitaki kills himself via a chemical X drug.
Yep.
It's not even it's really not a proper murder mystery at all, in any shape or form. That doesn't mean it's not fantastic and definitely deserves to be part of the genre, because it is definitely a mystery. And there are murders, there are plenty of murders, but the core murders that drive the entire narrative are barely even that. It's very interesting.
Well, I mean, I guess you could make the same argument about the setup of Umineko, where we don't ever really learn what the cause of death was in Umineko, even right towards the end. There's still a question mark at the end of the page, to go back to that analogy. And I think that it makes an interesting point then to compare how Higurashi is written, breaking all of the rules so absolutely brazenly, but then we come around to Umineko and it is made following all the rules while also staring them in the face and,
daring them to come closer.
Yeah.
That's exactly it, right? That's why I after I finished Higurashi, it took me several years before I actually was I should read Minagoroshi, I guess, because I'd heard about it, but my impression of it was that it was, like Higurashi, but a Victorian London setting, ? And that there was more exciting music, so it was more of an action story than a murder mystery, which is sort of correct. I had no reason to read it, but after I started, delving into it, and once I'd finished it and went back and looked into the community, the community that was, focusing around Umineko at the time, all that sort of thing. And now that I fully understand, now that I've actually read, Nox and Van Dyne, and I understand the strictures of murder mystery, it's so interesting to see the parallels. And as usual with Ryukishi, the way that he builds on his previous works, the way that he takes the criticism and the comments, the way that he takes his own ideas, one of the ideas in Higurashi of how if we just work together, anything is possible. Compare that directly to Umineko and its message. We can change fate if we all work together. And we'll see how that plays out in Matsuri Bayashi. But if we took that same idea of let's work together and figure this out, and we can, with power of family and friendship, apply to Umineko, we get a very different outcome.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's one of the interesting things. We obviously haven't finished Kikonia on our end, phase 1 of Kikonia just yet, for various reasons that we may or may not talk about, as we mentioned at the start of the episode.
Oof.
But it'll be interesting to see how those same, active response writing styles come back around in Kikonia. Because I think that the comparison between Higurashi and Umineko is very one-to-one. You can see what was responsive to what. Whereas when we get to Kikonia, we have two intermediary works and many years of change.
Yeah, like we can tell that he's grown just by reading even the first couple of opening chapters of Kikonia. But it'll be interesting to see, especially how that ends, because that's what we talk about in this entire section. Like, how do we wrap up the mystery, and how do we end these like very simple stories? Do we do it with a megalomaniac's Nazi supervillain? Maybe.
Yeah. I suppose that's just about where we should wrap things for this main part of the recap.
I think that's all I want to say,
Uploaded just after this is going to be the second recap. If we do talk about what's going on, as I mentioned at the start, it's going to be in that video, so you can go check on that one over there, but no promises.
It'll be a recap and also just news.
And just news.
Yeah, and we might have even finished Matsuri by then. No promises, but we might have. We'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, we really don't know what's happening at this point as we record, because these things are up in the air because of quarantines and what's going on in each of our own lives. So we'll see what happens, but at least we can still complain about Ryukishi's writing.
Yeah.
The one constant.
We'll finish it. We'll finish it one day. We'll finish Matsubayashi, and that'll be it. It'll be great.
Alrighty.
Looking forward to it.
See you next time.
Next time.